regarding fasting, where are we? In other words, what you just said, Dale Bredesen on Friday night talked about Alzheimer's. And one of the things he recommended is to not eat for 3 or 4 hours before you go to sleep, and then wait 12 to 16 hours before eating again for breakfast. So in other words, have dinner at 6 o'clock, finish at 6:30, and then maybe not eat again until 10 a.m. the next morning. So aside from not eating before bed and then waiting, let's say 12 to 16 hours, 16 hours before you eat the next day, and doing that on a daily basis, what do you think is the best fasting protocol? Should we do daily, any type of fasting at home? Should we only do it at a center? Should we, what would you say is the best practices in fasting, aside from the waiting a few hours before sleep, eating before sleep, and then, or not eating a few hours before sleep, then waiting 16 hours till the next day? Aside from that, at this point, what do you recommend for people that want to get the most disease prevention benefit? What do you believe would be the ultimate fasting protocol? Would it be juice fasting, water fasting? Would it be once a year? Would it be every few years? Would it be only at a center? Would it be at home? I'd like to hear the best fasting protocol advice that anyone would like to offer.
Okay, I'll jump in first. This is David Wolfe here. I would say this, it's very much dependent now on the toxicity of the person and what the person's background is. So if a person just suddenly, like, they snap out of the toxic food and potato chips and the other things that are going on and the glyphosate, they've really got to do some steady detoxification practices before they go full on into a home fast. Right? Because what you're saying is, like, what can we do at home? If you're under a supervised fast, then you can have someone look over you. But if you're going to do it by yourself, you've got to start weaning yourself off those foods, going organic, going onto juices, getting onto more of a liquid diet, getting your bowels working properly, detoxify your body, sweating, getting upside down, doing yoga, all those things. And that's so different for every person. There's people who've gone their whole life, never done anything. I just had a friend of mine just did his first 3-day water fast. He's 54, never had touched that. Now, he'd been organic for 20 years, 22 years actually, but he'd never done a water fast. So it's very much dependent on your history and what your body's ready for. One of the things I would say, if you're just going to get into intermittent fasting or fasting, is you just go easy on your body. Don't get too crazy. Suddenly, I've got to do a 21-day water fast at home tomorrow. Now that I've figured out that this is a good thing, very dangerous. It's too much, too quick. Go slowly is holy.
Thank you.
Yeah, one thing I've always found, and I get to see a lot of patients on a regular basis, and that I did 25 years of research on the oral microbiome, and we're actually doing a 50-patient double-blind clinical research study right now, and you see so much candida problems, candida infections, and you see a lot of microbiome imbalances. We're made, essentially we're made of microbes. We have 10 times the number of bacteria that outnumber our bacteria and microorganisms outnumber our own human cells, and these bacteria do everything from determine our body shape and color of our eyes and who we're going to marry, because they make pheromones, which determines, which sexual attraction. And sometimes these bacteria make a mistake. That's another story. But I think when we fast, we have to understand that there's a couple of things that need to be, and I'm so glad that David Wolfe pointed out the importance of it's not one size fits all. And there are people that have problems with elimination and opening downstream pathways for elimination. So you really want to, if you're not supervised, to at least have coaching of some sort when you fast. As far as, I do agree with Dr. Goldhamer about intermittent fasting. I think that's very, very positive way of going for not, and what Dale Bredesen recommended as well. But for myself and for what I would recommend to patients, I think it's really important to evaluate and see where you are in terms of the health spectrum before determining what type of fasting might be best.
Thank you.
So, fasting is a very powerful intervention. The intermittent fasting we're talking about, where people fast for 12 to 16 hours a day, can be done by almost everybody. Doesn't require modification of medications. It doesn't require medical supervision. It's a safe process for most people. When we talk about longer term fasting, there's a requirement, as David Wolfe pointed out, because of the biological individuality. You want to have a history exam and basic laboratory monitoring, because you want to have a baseline, not just to determine who's a good candidate or a poor candidate for fasting, but also to provide you a basis for evaluating whether the crises you're seeing in fasting are positive healing crises or deteriorative problems. They look the same sometimes to people. And the way you can differentiate is by knowing the history, monitoring the patient, determining what the trend of the acute response is, and having laboratory data to ensure that you don't get into a problem. I'm in a situation where I have hundreds of calls a month because I do the screening for True North Health Center and for a number of other clinics. And so I hear the patients that have been successful or unsuccessful at attempting remote fasting. If you fast in a facility or you fast on your own, you still need to have the benefit of history, exam, lab, and monitoring. You still need to rest. When people are too active with fasting, what happens is they force gluconeogenesis and the breakdown of protein. In a resting state, fasting primarily burns fat, and particularly visceral fat. But when you're overly active and you force increased glucose use, the only place the body can get that in the fasting state is the breakdown of protein. And so what you're trying to do is detoxify yourself, not deplete yourself. And so it's not just supervision that's important, it's also resting, being in an environment of rest, maintaining hydration. Dehydration, probably the most significant problem that can happen to people, particularly when they're too active in fasting. And in general, I mean, the truth is today, the single biggest thing medical intervention does to save lives is probably just hydrating people in the emergency room with IV fluids. People get dehydrated, and by maintaining hydration adequately, the body is able to overcome infections and other problems. What killed most people in the world of our ancient ancestors was dehydration. They died before the body was able to overcome whatever their salt was, because they didn't maintain hydration. The same vulnerability happens with fasting, and particularly in the very young and the very old, and in particular for people on pharmaceutical medications. You don't water fast on medications, and you can't just arbitrarily discontinue all medications without potentially serious issues. So some of the guidance is getting people to help you appropriately withdraw medications and being clinically stable enough to fast. The problem is most doctors have very little experience getting people off drugs, because they don't take people off drugs, because they believe that people need to be on drugs for the rest of their life. If you have hypertension, they'll promise you that you'll be on drugs the rest of your life, or diabetes, or autoimmune diseases, because getting well is not part of the paradigm of conventional medicine today. It's about disease management, manipulating symptoms using very powerful pharmaceutical intervention. And we all know that once people adopt a health promoting diet, you have to be prepared to modify medications, because too much or too little creates serious complications. And so that's where it's useful for people to get guidance from people that have some experience with people actually getting well, and that may not be their standard family physician.
Thank you.
I would like to say, like, from a different perspective, we look at, because I always hear this term detoxification thrown around all the time. But classically, I look at fasting as an intervention. Now, it also could be a practice, like normally, like Dr. Goldhamer saying, like that. That's totally fine, and I agree with that. I agree with all the benefits, and we see that all the time. We see patients going and having success with that. But it's more, But when we're looking at like a medical fast or something that's being supervised, it's a true intervention. It's actually like it's a treatment. But when I hear this term throwing around like detoxification, and everybody wants to be like, I just do some kind of cleanse or some kind of product or something like that. From an Ayurvedic perspective, which is about 4,000 years old, we look at, there's something called panchakarma. And so that the whole word detoxification actually comes from that. The problem is that it's not until like, the 60s where we started getting these ideas that are more westernized, it's like, well, I got to do a cleanse, or I got to flush something out, or I got to do something to kind of get rid of the toxins. But it's actually a medical practice, and there's a science to it, and it's not just a bowel regimen or a not eating regimen. And so that for true detoxification, it's actually a little bit more complicated, because you're talking about different layers of detoxification from mind all the way through the body. So that's one thing that we do at Sangevity very specifically. But yes, I think I agree with Dr. Goldhamer that, you know, there should be more medical supervision if someone's going to do more of an intense kind of practice, or, you know, if they're on multiple medications. Because a lot of people, I think, you know, they watch too much social media and they just jump in, or they hear some celebrity and they just jump into something, and it really becomes a counterproductive benefit for what they're trying to do, or what we're trying to give them. And what they should receive. Because when it's done appropriately, anything that's done appropriately, they usually get a benefit. But the problem is everybody wants to kind of treat themselves somewhat. Now, once you get into that daily practice, like once people understand how to fast and all, then that's great. But what I look at it is that that's still an intervention, right? Like when we look at like who are living the longest, if I look at, you know, the 5 blue zones, or I look at people, you know, in other cultures who live past 100 centurions, you know, that can be part of a regimen, but that doesn't mean that you have to do that to actually get healthy. Because remember, the epigenetics, we're just using these kind of techniques to kind of get you there faster, quicker, or we haven't done anything. Like David was saying, we haven't done, this person hasn't done anything for 25 years, so therefore we must do something. But I always look at it as like, if you get the epigenetics right, then you don't have to maybe go to an extreme or have to have that intensive intervention. It's going to become a daily practice as it is. And then if you need to have extra support, or you need to get further benefits, then going for a supervised or medical fast is appropriate.
If people make the diet and lifestyle changes, they adopt the diet, they do the exercise, they do the sleep, they get well. Most people recover.
Right.
Some people, despite their best efforts, have roadblocks, and that's where getting specialized support can be helpful, and overcoming. And some of the problems that people have is just their ability to adhere to the diet they know they want to do, but they're addicted to the artificial stimulation of dopamine in their brain that comes from the chemicals that have been added to their food. And so it's hard for them to make the change to a whole plant food diet. Sometimes that's an example where a contained fast can allow taste neuroadaptation, and now all of a sudden good foods taste good, and they're able to go along with the program that they've been trying to implement.
Right. And even when we do a panchakarma, for example, we don't have to even restrict food, and we can get the same benefits. So there's different approaches to the same concept. It's just that the fasting is more of this really westernized. I just have to keep bringing that up, because a lot of things about health right now is coming from a Western concept. And I always want to kind of always explain to the audience that, you know, things weren't just made in America at the end of the day, and especially since the 60s. Okay. And especially right now, since social media has come out, you know, it's, you know, it wasn't invented in Hollywood, by the way. So we have to really like to look towards, you know, the wisdom of ancient practices, and fasting is one of them, by the way. And in most cultures, actually, you know, Alan probably knows more history about fasting than anybody here. But I just always want to bring that cultural perspective, because sometimes, again, when it's presented, not here, but when we see it, like when I see things online, or my patients will bring something, it is more like something that someone just made up and then posted on TikTok, and then everybody trying to follow that. And that's also minimizing to a 15-second idea truly what it's really a longer discussion. And I mean, Alan probably gives a whole, you know, you can do a whole week discussion on that, obviously, with, you know, studies and whatnot. So, but I always like to bring that up, because it's important for people to understand that all these things are not just like, oh, I just go to the gym and just do something, or I just do something, you know, they use it like this willy-nilly thing. And for me, it's like, no, these are things that you have to understand, you have to respect. There's protocols, and it doesn't mean you have to be perfect, or, you know, have to be like, you know, super religious about it. But the idea is that there is ways to do it where you actually get full benefit. And there's also ways to do it where you actually may potentially get harm or not get the benefit, and then say, well, none of this is going to work. So then they throw up their hands and they go back to their regular lifestyle.
That's so true. You know, I just want to confirm what Dr. It's Pai, right?
Pai, yeah.
And Dr. Goldhamer said. You know, the fad thing is, it drives me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I see patients, and I have patients who have come in, they're on 5 days of a fast, they're totally dehydrated. They have no saliva in their mouth. They're getting gum line cavities, decay along the gum line, because they're not hydrating, as Dr. Goldhamer said. They heard about this on a TikTok, and like you said, and the reality is that they could be doing way more harm than good. Mm-hmm. And so really, you know, this is not a one size fits all. and it definitely needs a certain education. But we live in a culture where we want the quick fix. We want the, I'm going to do this fast, and then I'm going to be really healthy. I'm all cleaned out, and then I could go binge again. It's like, and they're drinking every night, alcohol consumption, ridiculous, and all this stuff. But then they'll fast for 5 days and think they're all better.
Right.
And I think everybody's illustrated that very, very well. And it's great to hear other doctors share the same frustration. So I think that was a terrific question.